Do you ever think about those church recipes from the 1980s? The ones that quietly faded into history? Back then, those recipes filled potlucks, bake sales, and Sunday tables with simple food that brought people together. So, how did something that held us so close just disappear? Pretzel Gel Salad was one of those church recipes that looked ridiculous but tasted like home. You had a crunchy pretzel crust on the bottom, sweet cream cheese filling in the middle, and strawberry gelatin with sliced fruit layered on top. It was salty, sweet, creamy, and bright red, all in one weird little slice. Back in the 1980s, this dish showed up at every fellowship hall, covered in plastic wrap, sitting next to a plate of deviled eggs or ham sliders. It was oddly perfect for church gatherings because it walked that line between dessert and side dish. One bite in, and you were never really sure if you were eating salad or pie, but nobody cared. Midwestern grandmothers made this in their sleep, and there was always a Pyrex dish or two floating around after Sunday service. Over time, though, people swapped it out for store-bought desserts, and the old gelatin salad slowly faded into history. Ham and cheese crescent roll bake was the lazy genius of every church breakfast in the 1980s. Picture this: store-bought crescent dough, deli ham, and shredded cheese rolled up into little pinwheels and baked until golden and bubbly. You could whip up 2 trays in under 30 minutes and feed the whole Sunday school class without breaking a sweat. It was simple, it was cheap, and it disappeared from the table faster than you could refill the coffee urn. These little ham and cheese bakes were perfect for early morning gatherings when no one wanted to be standing over the stove, but everyone needed something hearty. They were often served next to fruit salad or cinnamon coffee cake, filling the church basement with that unmistakable smell of melted cheese and fresh baked bread. But somewhere along the way, they quietly slipped off the menu. People swapped homemade trays for boxed donuts or skipped breakfast altogether, and one by one, those golden crescent roll bakes faded into history. Layer pea salad might sound like a mouthful, but if you grew up around church potlucks in the 1980s, you know exactly what I am talking about. Layers of iceberg lettuce, peas, onions, cheese, bacon bits, and mayonnaise stacked tall in a casserole dish, all topped off with a thick blanket of dressing. It looked impressive, especially when served in a glass bowl, with every colorful layer peeking through. This salad was pure Midwest potluck magic. It showed up at every Sunday gathering, tucked between deviled eggs and macaroni casserole, chilled just enough to hold together when scooped onto paper plates. It was creamy, crunchy, salty, and fresh, all the good things packed into one side dish. But as Tupperware got replaced with plastic wrap and church kitchens switched to pre-packaged options, the old-school pea salad quietly disappeared. Now, it is rare to see anyone stacking up those 7 layers, and just like that, another church classic faded into history. Corn pudding with Jiffy Mix was the backbone of every Thanksgiving church potluck in the 1980s. If you have never had it, imagine sweet cornbread meets custard, baked until soft and golden with crispy edges and just enough sweetness to make it feel like a side and dessert in one. It came together in minutes thanks to the little blue box of Jiffy cornbread mix that every pantry seemed to have back then. Grandmas, church ladies, and tired parents alike swore by it, especially for feeding crowds without breaking the bank. It was a must-have at fall potlucks, usually next to turkey slices and green bean casseroles, with folks going back for seconds before the prayer circle even ended. But times changed. Boxed cornbread got replaced with bakery rolls, and suddenly corn pudding was gone. It faded from potlucks and recipe cards, taking a little piece of 1980s church tradition with it. Mandarin orange Cool Whip cake was the unofficial sunshine dessert of every church gathering in the 1980s. Picture this: fluffy yellow boxed cake, canned mandarin oranges folded into the batter, and a cool, creamy topping made from crushed pineapple and whipped topping. It was light, fruity, and ridiculously easy to make, which meant it showed up everywhere. Baby showers, church potlucks, Easter brunches, you name it. People loved how bright it looked on the table, like a little slice of summer even in the dead of winter. It had that nostalgic artificial sweetness we all secretly loved back then. But somewhere along the way, the cool whipped tubs got swapped for bakery cakes and store-bought pies, and this simple, cheerful dessert slipped away. You do not see many Mandarin orange cool whip cakes at church tables anymore, and just like that, another feel-good favorite faded into history. Sweet and sour little Smokys were basically the star of every church crock-pot in the 1980s. Tiny cocktail sausages simmered in a sauce of grape jelly and mustard, sometimes with barbecue sauce or brown sugar for good measure. It sounds strange, but trust me, these little bites disappeared fast. You would walk into a church basement or fellowship hall and immediately smell that sticky, sweet, smoky aroma drifting from the buffet line. Youth groups loved them, holiday parties loved them, and potlucks were not complete without at least 2 slow cookers bubbling away with little Smokys. It was the kind of recipe everyone passed around, handwritten on index cards tucked into community cookbooks. But as the crock-pots went back in the cupboards and people leaned on store-bought appetizers, these quirky, sweet, and tangy sausages slowly vanished. Another church favorite that quietly faded into history. Cheddar green bean casserole with Ritz topping was a church cookbook upgrade that everyone swore by in the 1980s. Sure, the classic green bean casserole had been around since the 1950s, but this version turned it into something even cheesier and crunchier. You had tender green beans and creamy cheddar cheese soup, baked together and crowned with a golden layer of crushed buttery crackers. It was rich, gooey, and salty in the best possible way, and you could guarantee at least one dish would show up at every church potluck or holiday meal. It shared the table with ham, scalloped potatoes, and enough JellO salad to feed an army. But times changed. Canned soup recipes fell out of favor, and the humble green bean casserole, even the cheesy, Ritz-topped version, started disappearing. Now it is rare to see that bubbly golden crust at church dinners, and just like that, another 1980s classic faded into history. Pickle Wraps, or ham roll-ups as some folks called them, were a weirdly perfect church luncheon snack in the 1980s. You took deli ham slices, spread them with cream cheese, wrapped them around a dill pickle spear, and sliced the whole thing into little pinwheels. It was salty, creamy, crunchy, and oddly refreshing all at once. These roll-ups showed up on every plastic party tray from baby showers to funeral lunches, lined up neatly next to deviled eggs and cheese cubes. They were easy, cheap, and guaranteed to disappear by the end of the afternoon. Plus, they looked fancy enough to impress without much effort, which was perfect for potlucks where everyone tried to bring their best. But as catering companies and grocery store platters took over, the humble pickle wrap quietly disappeared. You do not see them much outside of old church kitchens anymore, just another little bite that faded into history. Frozen fruit salad squares were one of those church recipes that made you wonder how anyone survived the 1980s without a Pyrex dish. It was canned fruit cocktail, whipped cream, chopped nuts, and sometimes marshmallows, all stirred together and frozen into neat little squares. You sliced them cold and served them at potlucks, weddings, or any time a church gathering needed dessert that could survive sitting out for hours. They were light, creamy, a little crunchy, and packed with that unmistakable canned fruit flavor everyone secretly loved back then. Grandmothers swore by them, and every church freezer probably had a pan of these tucked away, just in case. But as frozen desserts got replaced by bakery trays and pre-made options, these retro fruit squares started vanishing. Now you hardly ever see them at potlucks or on recipe cards, and just like that, another church favorite quietly faded into history. Funeral potatoes with cornflake crust might have the saddest name in the world, but they brought nothing but comfort to church kitchens in the 1980s. This creamy hash brown casserole was packed with sour cream, shredded cheese, and topped with a golden, crunchy layer of crushed cornflakes. You saw it at every funeral luncheon, yes, but also at potlucks, holiday meals, and any time a crowd needed feeding fast. It was warm, cheesy, filling, and perfect for making ahead in giant batches. Folks joked that you could not host a church dinner without at least 2 pans of these showing up on the table. But as frozen casseroles and store-bought sides took over, Even this beloved classic started to fade away. Now, funeral potatoes with that signature cornflake crust are more memory than menu, and just like that, another comforting church dish faded into history. Congealed tomato aspic with celery and olives was the church potluck dish that looked fancy, confused half the room, but still showed up again and again in the 1980s. Imagine tomato juice turned into a bright red gelatin, molded into perfect circles or bundt shapes, with crunchy celery and green olives suspended inside like little edible decorations. It was savory, jiggly, and meant to sit proudly next to deviled eggs and cold salads on every folding table in the fellowship hall. This was the recipe your grandmother made from a church cookbook, flipping through the stained pages with confidence, even if nobody under 30 ever understood why vegetables belonged in gelatin. But back then, it was tradition. People served it with pride, and the older folks always grabbed a slice without hesitation. Somewhere along the way, though, JellO stopped being savory, and tomato aspic quietly slipped off the table. These days, you are more likely to see it in a vintage recipe book than on a potluck spread. And just like that, another retro church classic faded into history. Poppy seed chicken bake was pure comfort food straight from every 1980s church newsletter recipe section. You started with shredded chicken, smothered it in a creamy, tangy sauce, topped it with buttery Ritz crackers and just enough poppy seeds to make it look special. It baked up bubbly, golden, and rich, the kind of casserole that disappeared fast after Sunday service or at small group potlucks. It hit all the right notes: creamy, crunchy, salty, and filling enough to feed a crowd without breaking your grocery budget. Families loved it for weeknights, but in church kitchens, this was a go-to when you needed something hearty that felt homemade. It always sat on the table beside green bean casserole, macaroni salad, or those JellO dishes everyone secretly fought over. But over time, people moved toward fancier meals or pre-made options, and this simple, satisfying bake started disappearing. You do not see poppy seed chicken gracing many potlucks these days, and just like that, another comforting church favorite faded into history. Orange tapioca. Fluff salad was sunshine in a bowl, and in the 1980s, no church dessert table felt complete without it. You had orange JellO, instant vanilla pudding, tiny tapioca pearls, and whipped topping all folded together into a light, creamy, slightly chewy dessert that somehow counted as salad. It came chilled, fluffy, and glowing with that retro, artificial orange color we all secretly loved back then. Kids piled it high on their plates next to ham slices and potato casserole, and grandmothers handed down the recipe like it was family treasure. It showed up at church picnics, Easter brunches, and Sunday potlucks, scooped into Tupperware bowls with plastic spoons ready to serve the crowd. It was cheerful, it was simple, and everyone knew who made the best version in town. But when boxed mixes and Cool Whip fell out of favor and dessert tables got taken over by store-bought sweets, orange tapioca fluff quietly vanished. These days, it is more memory than menu. And just like that, another bright little bite of church tradition faded into history. Velveeta and Rotel cheese dip was the undisputed king of every church game night and youth ministry event in the 1980s. You took a block of Velveeta cheese, melted it down, stirred in a can of spicy Rotel tomatoes, and kept the whole gooey pot bubbling warm next to a giant bowl of tortilla chips. It was salty, creamy, and just spicy enough to feel rebellious at a church function without anyone actually breaking the rules. Kids, parents, and the pastor himself crowded around the crock pot, scooping up cheese dip by the handful, while folks set up folding chairs for bingo or Bible study. It was ridiculously simple, filling, and guaranteed to disappear long before the night ended. But as newer dips and fancy appetizers showed up at gatherings, this humble neon orange classic started disappearing. You do not see as many bubbling pots of Velveeta and Rotel at church functions anymore, and just like that, another cheesy favorite faded into history. Sour cream. Raisin pie was one of those old-fashioned church desserts that either made you smile or politely avoid the dessert table altogether. Picture a rich, tangy custard filling made from sour cream and brown sugar, studded with plump raisins, all tucked inside a flaky pie crust and topped with a cloud of toasted meringue. It showed up at every Lutheran bake sale, Baptist potluck, or small-town church dinner, especially in the upper Midwest. This pie had roots deep in farm kitchens and community cookbooks, with generations swearing by its unique flavor combo. Sweet, tangy, creamy, it hit all the old-school dessert notes, even if the raisins caused a few raised eyebrows. But as dessert trends changed, and newer, fancier sweets took over the table, this humble pie slowly disappeared. You do not see many sour cream raisin pies gracing potlucks these days, and just like that, another slice of church tradition faded into history. Glorified rice sounded fancy, but it was really just church comfort food dressed up for the potluck table. You took cooked white rice, folded in whipped topping, sweetened it with crushed pineapple, and dotted it with bright red maraschino cherries. It was cold, creamy, sweet, and just weird enough to stand out on a buffet line stacked with casseroles, salads, and sandwich platters. This dish showed up everywhere in the 1980s. Funeral luncheons, baby showers, Sunday afternoon gatherings, scooped onto paper plates with pride. It was light enough to pass as salad, but sweet enough to feel like dessert, which made it perfect for stretching a meal without spending much. Every church had one or two folks known for making the best glorified rice, with little family tweaks passed down over the years. But eventually, store-bought desserts and fancier salads replaced these humble homemade dishes. Now, glorified rice is more of a memory than a menu item. And just like that, another sweet church classic faded into history. Hamburger corn casserole was a straight-up survival meal turned potluck staple in the 1980s church kitchen scene. Ground beef browned up with onions, mixed with canned corn, elbow macaroni, and tomato soup, then baked until bubbly and piping hot. It was not fancy, but it filled every belly and made sure no one left the table hungry. This casserole showed up in church basements, choir practices, and weeknight dinners when families needed something hearty that stretched their pantry without emptying their wallets. It was basic, it was dependable, and there was always a big spoon ready for second helpings. Toss a little shredded cheese on top, and suddenly it felt downright indulgent. But as church cookbooks collected dust and pre-made meals hit the shelves, these humble casseroles slowly disappeared. Now, hamburger corn casserole is mostly remembered by those who grew up scooping it onto paper plates after Sunday service, and just like that, another hearty classic faded into history. Snickers. Salad might be the most ridiculous salad to ever grace a church potluck, but back in the 1980s, it was everywhere. You took chopped Snickers candy bars, diced green apples, Cool Whip, and sometimes a sprinkle of pudding mix, stirred it all together, and called it salad. It was creamy, crunchy, chocolatey, and sweet enough to count as dessert, even if it shared the table with coleslaw and potato salad. Kids loved it, adults pretended it was healthy, and every family had their own version tucked into the church cookbook. It was part dessert, part potluck prank, but no one complained when it showed up next to the deviled eggs and trays of sandwiches. But as recipes changed and people leaned toward fancier store-bought sweets, this playful salad started disappearing. You do not see many bowls of Snickers salad at church gatherings these days, and just like that, another quirky favorite faded into history. Mock apple pie with Ritz crackers was pure 1980s church potluck magic, a recipe born from frugality and a little culinary trickery. You took Ritz crackers, crushed them up, layered them in a pie crust with sugar, cinnamon, and lemon juice, then baked the whole thing until it somehow tasted like apple pie. No apples required. This Depression-era holdover stuck around in small-town churches well into the 1980s, passed down from grandmothers who remembered when you had to make do with whatever was in the pantry. It was a clever little recipe that kept showing up at church bake sales and holiday tables, usually served with a knowing smile and a reminder not to judge it until you tried a bite. But as real fruit pies got easier to make and boxed desserts took over, mock apple pie slowly disappeared from church gatherings. Now, it is more of a quirky memory than a menu staple. And just like that, another clever kitchen trick faded into history. Broccoli and cheese ring mold was the savory, jiggly centerpiece of every retro church table in the 1980s. You took cooked broccoli, shredded cheddar cheese, mayonnaise, and unflavored gelatin, mixed it all together, and poured it into a bundt pan to chill. The result? A bright green, cheesy, wobbly mold that looked like it came straight out of a vintage magazine. It was cold, creamy, and surprisingly tasty in that strange, nostalgic way only church recipes can be. People sliced it like cake and served it alongside deviled eggs, JellO salads, and every casserole under the sun. It brought flair to potlucks, even if half the room only grabbed a sliver out of curiosity. But as molded salads fell out of fashion and church tables leaned toward more modern sides, this odd little bundt pan tradition quietly disappeared. You do not see many broccoli and cheese rings gracing the potluck spread anymore, and just like that, another retro church favorite faded into history. Wacky cake with vinegar and cocoa was the dessert that proved church kitchens did not need eggs, butter, or fancy mixers to pull off something sweet. You mixed it right in the pan: flour, sugar, cocoa powder, oil, water, and a splash of vinegar that somehow turned it into a rich, moist chocolate cake every time. It was simple, cheap, and practically foolproof, which made it a favorite among church bakers and bake sale organizers trying to stretch every dollar. You would see it at potlucks, Sunday coffee hours, and after-service gatherings, usually dusted with powdered sugar or drizzled with basic frosting. No one cared that it skipped the eggs. The taste was good, the price was right, and the cleanup was a breeze. For families on a budget or folks baking for a crowd, Wacky cake was the secret weapon of the 1980s church scene. But as boxed mixes and fancier desserts crept in, this humble mix-in-the-pan classic started disappearing. You do not see many Wacky cakes on potluck tables anymore, and just like that, another clever church recipe faded into history. Pineapple cheese ball with pecans was the sweet and savory showstopper of every 1980s church tea, bridal shower, and holiday potluck. You mixed cream cheese with crushed pineapple, bell pepper, green onion, and a little seasoning, shaped it into a neat ball, and rolled the whole thing in chopped pecans. It was creamy, tangy, crunchy, and oddly addictive when paired with buttery crackers on a folding table next to the punch bowl. This cheese ball always appeared at ladies' luncheons, committee meetings, and anywhere folks needed to impress with minimal effort. It looked fancy, tasted like pure nostalgia, and was one of those recipes every church newsletter seemed to print at least once. People circled around it with paper plates, scooping away until nothing but crumbs and pecan bits remained. But as party platters replaced homemade appetizers and church teas lost their old-school flair, this pineapple cheese ball quietly disappeared. You do not see them much outside of vintage cookbooks, and just like that, another retro church classic faded into history. Zucchini chocolate bread was every garden-loving church member's sneaky way to turn summer squash into something indulgent. Moist, rich, and dark with cocoa powder, this loaf packed in shredded zucchini that you could barely taste, but made the crumbs soft and perfectly dense. In the 1980s, when backyard gardens overflowed with zucchini, this bread showed up at every potluck, bake sale, and fellowship coffee hour. Wrapped in foil or plastic wrap, stacked in neat slices, it was the kind of thing folks proudly shared, even if the kids never knew there were vegetables hidden inside. It was a small-town church staple, especially when harvest season left everyone looking for creative ways to use up their crops. You would see it nestled between banana bread, coffee cakes, and trays of brownies, offering just enough sweetness to pass as dessert. But as fancier baked goods took over and fewer people kept backyard gardens, zucchini chocolate bread started to vanish. You do not see many slices at church events anymore, and just like that, another homespun favorite quietly faded into history. Layered Mexican cornbread was the boldest thing to hit the church potluck table in the 1980s, and for some congregations, it was downright exotic. You started with boxed cornbread mix, folded in creamed corn, jalapenos, sometimes sour cream, and topped it with seasoned ground beef and melted cheese. It baked up spicy, hearty, and cheesy enough to draw a crowd at any fellowship dinner or community event. It brought a Tex-Mex twist to the otherwise meatloaf and mashed potato menu most churches leaned on back then. Folks scooped generous squares onto their plates, pairing it with coleslaw or baked beans, and it disappeared fast. Some versions swapped in shredded chicken or black beans, but the jalapenos were non-negotiable for those who liked a little heat. But as newer dishes and pre-made party trays replaced these scratch-made casseroles, layered Mexican cornbread slowly faded away. You do not see much of it at church dinners these days, and just like that, another spicy little tradition disappeared from history. Peanut butter sheet cake was pure Southern church comfort, baked big enough to feed the whole congregation and slathered in warm, creamy icing. It started with a simple batter poured into jelly roll pans and baked until golden and fluffy. Then came the magic, a warm peanut butter frosting spread over the top, seeping into the cake while it was still hot, making every bite rich, moist, and full of old-school sweetness. You saw this cake everywhere in the 1980s, church picnics, revival meetings, bake sales, stacked high in sheet pans with plastic wrap stretched over the top. It fed dozens with ease, which made it perfect for big families, potlucks, or fundraisers. Kids loved it, grown-ups loved it, and someone always tucked an extra slice away for later. But as boxed desserts and store-bought sweets took over, this homemade peanut buttery treat started fading from the table. You do not see many peanut butter sheet cakes gracing church gatherings anymore, and just like that, another crowd pleaser quietly faded into history. Lemon pudding. Poke cake was sunshine on a plate, straight from every 1980s church dessert table. You started with a boxed lemon cake, baked it up golden and fluffy, then poked holes all over the top and poured lemon pudding into every nook and cranny. The whole thing chilled in the fridge before getting topped with whipped cream and sometimes a little lemon zest for extra flair. It was tart, creamy, sweet, and ice cold, the kind of refreshing dessert that always hit the spot after a heavy potluck meal. You saw it at church picnics, holiday brunches, and potlucks stacked with casseroles and deviled eggs. It looked fancy, tasted bright, and disappeared fast, especially when summer heat made you crave something cool. But as fancier desserts and store-bought cakes became the norm, lemon pudding poke cake quietly slipped off the potluck table. You do not see many of those bright yellow slices at church events anymore, and just like that, another cheerful classic faded into history. Chicken chow. Main casserole was the crunchy, creamy, Americanized comfort food that every 1980s church potluck secretly loved. You took canned chow mein noodles, cream soup, shredded chicken, and sometimes water chestnuts, stirred it all together, topped it with extra noodles for crunch, and baked it until bubbly. It was just exotic enough to feel exciting, but familiar enough for every church member to pile it onto their plate without hesitation. These casseroles popped up at church luncheons, fellowship dinners, and weeknight potlucks when families needed something hearty and filling. It had that satisfying salty crunch from the noodles and that unmistakable creaminess every good casserole delivered. But as church menus leaned more toward fresh salads or trendy appetizers, this old-school canned chow mein classic started disappearing. You do not see many noodle-topped casseroles at church tables these days, and just like that, another retro potluck favorite faded into history. Macaroni coleslaw salad was a potluck legend, blending creamy pasta salad with crisp coleslaw in one chilled, tangy bowl. You had elbow macaroni, shredded cabbage, carrots, onions, and a creamy vinegary dressing that tied it all together. It was cool, crunchy, hearty, and practically built to survive hours on a folding table in the fellowship hall. Every church gathering in the 1980s had at least one giant bowl of it, usually served in a Tupperware container with a serving spoon that never stayed clean for long. It stretched ingredients, fed a crowd, and paired with everything from ham sandwiches to fried chicken. Folks passed the recipe around at baby showers, funeral lunches, and summer picnics, proud of how easy it was to throw together. But as pasta salads got fancier and store-bought coleslaw became the go-to, macaroni coleslaw quietly disappeared from the potluck spread. You do not see many bowls of it at church gatherings these days, and just like that, another practical, filling classic faded into history. Blueberry JellO salad with cream cheese layer was one of those pretty, layered desserts that felt fancy but came straight from the church fridge. You made a base of blueberry JellO, folded in canned fruit, then poured a creamy mixture of sweetened cream cheese and whipped topping over the set layer. Sometimes it was topped with crushed pecans or graham cracker crumbs for extra crunch. It chilled firm, sliced neatly, and sat on the dessert table at every church potluck, holiday dinner, or ladies' luncheon in the 1980s. It was colorful, creamy, fruity, and light enough to sneak onto your plate next to potato salad without judgment. Everyone had their own version, and church cookbooks proudly printed the recipe next to all the JellO salads that defined the decade. But as layered gelatin desserts fell out of fashion, blueberry JellO salad slowly disappeared from church gatherings. You do not see many of those neat purple squares anymore. And just like that, another chilled church tradition faded into history. Hot fudge pudding cake was the sneaky, self-saucing chocolate dessert that every church baker kept in their back pocket. You whipped up a basic chocolate batter, poured hot water or coffee over the top, and baked it into a rich, gooey cake with its own fudgy sauce hidden underneath. It was magic in a casserole dish. The top baked fluffy, the middle stayed molten, and every scoop delivered warm, chocolatey comfort. Folks made it for Bible study nights, youth group events, and last-minute dessert emergencies when something homemade was expected but time was short. You often saw it served straight from the pan, with a dollop of whipped cream or a scoop of vanilla ice cream on the side. It was rich, simple, and guaranteed to disappear before the meeting wrapped up. But as boxed brownies and store-bought sweets became more popular, hot fudge pudding cake quietly slipped off the dessert table. You do not see many church potlucks ending with this gooey classic anymore, and just like that, another cozy favorite faded into history. Macaroni salad with pickles and Miracle Whip is a dish that defined many church picnics and potlucks in the 20th century. The combination of elbow macaroni, sweet pickles, and the tangy zip of Miracle Whip dressing made this dish a beloved classic. It was the perfect side to complement the heavier casseroles and meats often found at these gatherings. The sweet pickles added a burst of flavor that balanced the creamy dressing, while the macaroni provided that comforting base that everyone loved. Each bite of this macaroni salad is a mix of textures and flavors, from the crunch of the pickles to the smooth creaminess of the dressing. Whether served as a side or even as a standalone dish, macaroni salad with pickles and Miracle Whip was a crowd pleaser. But if you think this tangy delight was the highlight, wait until you experience the cool, sweet dish that followed this trend, coming up next. In the world of comfort desserts, few could match the magic of a self-saucing, virtuous vanilla pudding cake. This clever dish baked into two distinct layers, a fluffy vanilla cake on top and a rich, warm pudding underneath. Simple, satisfying, and slightly mysterious, it was a favorite at church potlucks where ingenuity and indulgence often went hand in hand. Self-saucing cakes date back to the early 20th century, gaining popularity during the Great Depression when frugality was key. By the 1970s, the vanilla variation became a staple of community cookbooks, praised for turning pantry basics, flour, sugar, milk, and eggs, into something that felt both luxurious and homemade. Its practicality was unbeatable. Minimal ingredients, no frosting needed, and a built-in sauce that made it feel like two desserts in one. But as dessert trends grew more elaborate in the 1980s and beyond, this humble cake struggled to keep up. The rise of rich layer cakes, cheesecakes, and decorative confections made its understated appearance less appealing. Additionally, the convenience of boxed cake mixes overshadowed the charm of from-scratch baking. Layered pea salad might not have gotten the attention it deserved, but once you tasted it, you understood its appeal. This salad is all about layering, from the crispness of the peas to the creamy dressing, the crunchy bacon, and the sweetness of the onions. Every bite offers a perfect balance of flavors and textures. It's the kind of dish that brings everyone back for seconds, especially when the layers are built just right. The peas provide a subtle sweetness and pop, while the mayo-based dressing binds everything together in a way that makes the salad feel indulgent, despite its simplicity. It's a salad that works well for any occasion, but especially for those summer church picnics when you need a dish that can stand up to the heat and still taste great. And speaking of cool, refreshing salads, there's one more dish on the way that brings all the sweet and savory flavors into a gorgeous combination. Stay tuned for the next recipe. In the heyday of retro desserts, Charity Cherry Salad was a shining star at potlucks and family gatherings. This chilled dish combined bright maraschino cherries, velvety cream cheese, and fluffy whipped topping, creating a dessert that was as vibrant as it was indulgent. Served in elegant glass bowls or set in decorative molds, it added a touch of flair to any church supper table. The popularity of dishes like this can be traced back to the mid-20th century, when refrigeration revolutionized home cooking. Desserts that could be prepared ahead of time and served cold became the ultimate convenience for busy homemakers. Maraschino cherries, first commercialized in the early 1900s, were a pantry favorite thanks to their long shelf life and striking red color. Blending them with cream cheese and whipped topping was a clever way to create a dessert that felt rich but remained affordable. Despite its charm, Charity Cherry Salad fell out of fashion as modern palates shifted away from overly sweet processed ingredients. The rise of fresh fruit salads and lighter desserts in the late 20th century further sealed its fate. Chicken spaghetti bake is a dish that perfectly combines comfort and convenience, making it a favorite at church gatherings, especially in the South. This creamy, cheesy, slightly spicy baked spaghetti comes together quickly, thanks to the magic of canned soup, and it's loaded with everything you love: tender chicken, hearty pasta, and a luscious sauce. Often topped with a layer of cheese that melts into a golden, bubbly topping, this dish has been passed down through generations, showing up on church potluck tables and family dinners alike. The flavor is rich but not overwhelming, with just the right amount of spice to add a kick without making it too hot for the crowd. It's a dish that feeds a lot and satisfies even the pickiest eaters. If you think this cheesy casserole is the ultimate comfort food, though, wait until you experience another classic that's just as delicious but with a bit of a sweet twist. Coming up next. Southern Soul Chili is pretty much exactly what you'd expect that to taste like. You put the words Southern Soul and Chili together, and you paint a pretty colorful picture of the Southwest and Texas potlucks. The evolution of this dish is actually pretty closely rooted in Native American, Mexican, and Spanish cultures, though. Over time, it's begun to involve all kinds of things, like beef and chili peppers and even tomatoes and beans. The beans were a pretty new addition, because it wasn't until the Depression that people began to use pinto beans and kidney beans. Even black-eyed beans were things that people took to a lot. Southern soul chili in general was a unique spin that drew a lot of its style from soul food staples and a lot of its flavors from Southern cuisine. You had the chili and the focus on natural ingredients, which was something you'd get from soul food. Still, the smoked meats and sweet potatoes were unmistakable. That was a Southern classic if I've ever seen one. Where else do you see that much smoked brisket being used? Or that much pulled pork? Either way, this makes for one really explosive chili, so try it at your own risk. Pineapple cheese casserole is one of those dishes that seems a bit strange at first, but once you take that first bite, you'll be hooked. The sweet, tangy pineapple chunks pair surprisingly well with the sharp, savory cheddar cheese, creating a perfect blend of sweet and savory that you didn't know you needed. Often served as a side dish, this casserole combines the richness of cheese with the brightness of pineapple, making it a unique and flavorful addition to any meal. Whether served alongside ham or roasted chicken, pineapple cheese casserole always stood out at church potlucks for its ability to balance flavors that normally wouldn't go together. It's sweet, it's cheesy, and it's downright delicious. And as surprising as this dish may seem, there's another salad coming up that layers together ingredients in a way that you won't want to miss. Get ready for a dish that will bring even more excitement to the table. Pimento cheese spread is a Southern favorite that found its way into almost every church kitchen, making an appearance at picnics, church lunches, and family gatherings. This creamy, cheesy spread combines sharp cheddar cheese with diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and a touch of seasoning to create a rich, tangy, and slightly sweet spread that's perfect for just about anything. Whether it was slathered on crackers, served as a dip for celery, or spread thick on white bread triangles, pimento cheese spread was a go-to appetizer that could be made in minutes, and was loved by all. The combination of sharp cheddar and mild pimentos was simple yet delicious, offering a comforting flavor that no one could resist. It's the kind of dish that became a tradition in many church kitchens, passed down from one generation to the next. And speaking of spreads, the next dish brings a surprising sweetness to the table, a cake that's rich in history and flavor. Stay tuned. Few dishes from the 1970s could walk the line between savory and sweet quite like this one. Sweet potato soufflé did just that. It was a culinary bridge between vegetables and dessert. With its cloud-like texture, cinnamon-kissed sweetness, and the signature marshmallow topping, it offered both comfort and spectacle at every church potluck or holiday gathering. The dish has deep roots in Southern cooking, where sweet potatoes have been a staple for centuries. During the mid-20th century, this recipe gained widespread popularity as canned goods and convenience foods became kitchen staples. Marshmallows, introduced in the late 1800s and heavily marketed in the 20th century, were the final flourish, a whimsical, sugary topping that turned a simple casserole into a crowd pleaser. Yet, as tastes evolved, the soufflé began to fade from weekly menus. The sugar-heavy marshmallow layer clashed with growing concerns about healthier eating. Sweet potatoes themselves survived the shift, reborn as fries, chips, and roasted sides. But the soufflé, with its unapologetic decadence, became relegated to holiday tables and church cookbook archives. Cheese, sausage, and croissant strata is this really comforting brunch dish that actually works amazingly for potlucks. It works because it's the perfect little starter to bring to a party. Most people already know who's going to be bringing what, and there are designated people who bring the really heavy-hitter dishes. That leaves people who really need to nail the sides, appetizers, and desserts. For them, this dish was literally a no-compromise sort of thing. It was absolutely impossible to have a potluck without somebody bringing over a croissant strata, especially if you lived in the openly French neighborhoods. Sorry, by that I mean the ones who would cook nothing else but French food. Strata has lots of layers, especially in Italy, where they take the attention to detail super seriously. Traditional strata recipes make use of sliced bread, baguettes, croissants, and all kinds of other things. This dish was experimented with a lot while it was becoming a big thing in America, so you had people all over the country doing their own version of a strata. Lots of people played around with the kinds of cheeses you could use, or they would switch out the sausages for some other meat. Either way, it was a wonderful little bread-based dish to serve as a filler until the next big meal. Tuna noodle casserole with crushed chips was the ultimate budget-friendly, pantry-stretching weeknight meal that saved many busy families. Made with canned tuna, noodles, and a creamy sauce, this dish was easy to assemble and always satisfying. The real magic came with the topping, crushed potato chips sprinkled over the casserole, giving it that perfect crunch that made every bite so delicious. It's the kind of dish that's simple but never boring, offering a comforting blend of flavors that everyone could enjoy. This casserole was a go-to for busy parents who wanted a meal that could feed a crowd without breaking the bank. It's a meal that's been passed down through the years, often showing up at church events and potlucks. And while this casserole might be the perfect weeknight dinner, there's a sweet, creamy salad coming next that will add a touch of magic to any table. Stay tuned for the next nostalgic favorite. Spanicopita, on the other hand, is a traditionally Greek dish. This is a savory pie, and it makes a lot of use of some ingredients you don't typically see as the main stars of the show in America. You have parsley, dill, and spinach as far as herbs and greens go, and feta cheese. Top it off with some caramelized onions, and you're good to go. By far, though, the most interesting thing people use here is phyllo dough. This dough was pretty much the trademark of the pie itself in Greece. It gave the pie a really unique and buttery taste that made it stand out in comparison to the fluffier, heavier doughs that people were using at the time. Traditional pizza dough, for example, was a lot less delicate. You could say that people began to think of fusing Spanicopita, which was a really niche dish, by the way, with pizza thanks to the fusion food trends that were going around back then. I think this comes from Mediterranean cuisine, since it has a lot of those flavors. The flaky dough and the use of olive oil to butter it make this a much more interesting pizza than what you would typically expect. Cheesy grits with green chilies is the ultimate comfort food, especially when it's served on a Wednesday night at the church rec hall. This Southern classic combines the rich, creamy texture of grits with the bold kick of green chilies, creating a dish that's both comforting and full of flavor. The grits are cooked until soft and creamy, then mixed with sharp melting cheese that gives each bite a savory richness. The green chilies add just the right amount of spice, turning this simple dish into something extraordinary. Cheesy grits with green chilies has long been a favorite for breakfast for dinner nights, where it can stand on its own or be paired with a variety of other dishes. It's a perfect side dish, offering a spicy, cheesy complement to meats and vegetables alike. The warmth and comfort of the grits, along with the pop of heat from the chiles, make this dish a satisfying choice for any occasion. Whether served with fried chicken, sausage, or as a hearty meal on its own, it's always a crowd pleaser. If you think this Southern classic is the perfect addition to any table, wait until you see the next dessert. A sweet cake that's equally rich and irresistible. Old-fashioned stewed apples is the kind of dish that evokes instant nostalgia. Slow cooked to perfection with cinnamon, butter, and brown sugar, these apples fill the house with a warm, comforting aroma that instantly transports you back to simpler times. Served in classic glass Pyrex dishes, this sweet, tender dessert was often found at church picnics and family gatherings where it was a reliable crowd pleaser. The apples soften as they cook, absorbing all the flavors of the cinnamon and brown sugar, creating a syrupy, rich sauce that you could almost drink by itself. It's a dish that doesn't need to be fancy to be loved, just the right balance of sweet and spicy, with that home-cooked, heartwarming feeling. It's perfect on its own, or as a topping for ice cream or pound cake. But if you think stewed apples are the ultimate comfort dessert, there's a salad coming up that has just as much nostalgic value. Stay tuned for the next dish. Spaghetti pie casserole is probably one of the first instances we have of fusion food overtaking common American interests. While it doesn't really have a well-documented starting point in history like some other burgers and loaves do, it is pretty interesting to see the kind of pipeline this place has taken. The casserole craze in the middle of the 20th century reflected the broader interest of Americans dipping their toes into foreign cuisines, especially whatever the French and Italians had cooked up. Something about their kitchens was irresistible to most people. People seem to believe that this dish got its inspiration from lasagna and baked ziti, which I can't lie makes sense. Both of those have been a big part of Italian-American culture for ages now, and spaghetti, despite not being typical in Italy, has become a really popular choice for American homes. A spaghetti pie itself was purely a home chef classic, though, and it was thanks to how available processed ingredients were becoming. Now that you could just buy pre-made crusts and spaghetti packets, a lot of the work that people associated with it before just went up in the air. You may not believe this, but it was actually easy to prepare for this. In the culinary playbook of the 1970s, green beans weren't just a side dish, they were often dressed to impress. Graceful green bean bundles wrapped in smoky bacon and glazed with brown sugar offered an elegant upgrade to the humble vegetable. With their sweet and savory allure, these bundles quickly became a favorite at church potlucks and holiday dinners. The dish's appeal lay in its balance of practicality and flair. Green beans were an accessible and affordable vegetable, while bacon and brown sugar transformed them into something festive. The bundles were easy to assemble and bake, making them a convenient choice for busy cooks. They also served dual purposes. They worked as both a side dish and an appetizer, seamlessly bridging the gap between finger food and a plated meal. By the late 20th century, however, changing tastes and dietary trends began to edge these bundles off the table. The combination of bacon and sugar, once seen as indulgent, started to feel overly rich for everyday fare. Health-conscious cooking also played a role, as lighter vegetable dishes gained popularity. Liver and onions with brown gravy is one of those forgotten classics that was once the centerpiece of many Sunday suppers. Yes, it might not be the most popular dish today, but it was a beloved favorite for generations. The rich, earthy taste of the liver paired perfectly with the savory brown gravy, while the onions added a bit of sweetness and texture to balance out the flavors. Some grandmothers swore by this dish, preparing it for Sunday family meals, where it was often served alongside mashed potatoes and vegetables. Though it may be seen as an acquired taste for those who loved it, liver and onions were a comforting, satisfying meal. The recipe was simple but effective, showcasing the beauty of slow cooking and rich flavors. And just when you thought we'd covered all the forgotten classics, there's another gelatin dish on the way that might just surprise you. Keep reading for the next recipe. Cucumber canapés, on the other hand, are something else entirely. This time around, you can definitely tell where they came from. Just a quick look at their history will point you right to 18th century France, where a canapé was the new trend in town. Fast forward just a little bit to when the first French and European immigrants started coming around to America, and you'll figure out that they actually brought this recipe over with them. Why was this something that did well, though? If you've ever heard of the 1960s, you'll hear the phrase health consciousness thrown around a lot. There was a good reason for that too. But the seeds of all the vegetable-heavy dieting shifts of the later decades were sown during this time. There was a small but progressively louder community of concerned parents and doctors who were voicing their opinions. They firmly believed American diets were bad, just flat-out bad for you. The best thing to do then was to eat greener. And what says green and clean like a cucumber? Okay, corny metaphors aside, it really did help make a gradual and daily shift towards better eating habits. A canapé itself was just a series of small bites with lots of different bread and cracker toppings, but this puff pastry ended up being just what people needed. Molasses stack cake is one of those desserts that's both simple and deeply nostalgic, especially in the Southern church tradition. This cake is made with layers of spiced molasses-flavored cake, stacked high and often filled with a sweet apple butter or fruit preserves. The deep, rich flavor of molasses shines through, creating a cake that's perfect for any occasion, but especially for gatherings where people appreciate homemade, heartfelt dishes. Each layer is tender, yet sturdy enough to hold the sweet filling in place, making it a treat that's both satisfying and easy to eat. The flavor of molasses adds a warmth and depth that you don't get from typical sweet cakes, and the texture is moist without being overly heavy. Often made for church picnics, weddings, or holiday dinners, this cake has a way of bringing everyone together over a slice. And while this molasses cake might be a perfect ending to any meal, there's one more classic dessert on the way that offers a touch of sweetness and nostalgia. Stay tuned. Baked apple desserts have long been a staple of American cooking, and Altar Apple Betty was a quintessential example of turning humble ingredients into something extraordinary. Made with sliced apples, a fragrant cinnamon-spiced oat topping, and brown sugar for sweetness, this dish was a warm, rustic treat that often graced church potluck tables and family dinners alike. Its roots can be traced back to colonial America, where frugal cooks used seasonal fruits and pantry staples to create desserts that didn't require elaborate preparation. The beauty of Apple Betty was its simplicity. No pie crust to fuss over, just a quick assembly of apples and a crumbly topping that baked to golden perfection. It was versatile too, ideal as a dessert, a sweet breakfast, or even a snack when served cold. So why isn't it as common today? As dessert trends shifted, Apple Betty faced stiff competition from flashier options like pies, cobblers, and crisps. The recipe's old-fashioned simplicity, once a selling point, became overshadowed by desserts that promised more indulgence or visual appeal. Altar Apple. Betty remains a nostalgic reminder of kitchens where everything was made from scratch and desserts were heartfelt contributions to the table. Velveeta cheese soup is the epitome of comfort food, especially during the colder months when the chill seems to settle in and linger. This velvety, creamy soup was often served in simple coffee mugs during midweek church services, bringing warmth and satisfaction to anyone who walked through those church doors. Made with Velveeta cheese, a staple in many church kitchens, this soup has a smooth, indulgent texture that melts in your mouth with every spoonful. It's a no-fuss recipe that's packed with flavor, perfect for feeding a crowd on a budget. The cheesy richness is complemented by the occasional splash of milk or broth, making it a cozy meal for anyone who needed a pick-me-up in the middle of the week. And while this soup was always a hit, there's another dish that takes its tangy twist and adds a whole new layer of flavor. Stay tuned to discover the next surprising recipe. The cheese log, simple yet sophisticated, was a centerpiece of 1970s entertaining, and the chapel cheese log was a classic example of its enduring charm. A blend of cream cheese, shredded cheddar, and seasonings rolled in crushed nuts, this dish was as much about presentation as it was about flavor. Paired with crackers, it graced countless church potlucks and holiday spreads, offering a bite-sized burst of creamy, nutty indulgence. The origins of the cheese log can be traced back to mid-century culinary trends, when convenience and elegance often went hand in hand. Cheese logs became a staple in the 1960s and 70s, popularized by their ease of preparation and adaptability. Home cooks could mix in herbs, spices, or even dried fruit to suit their tastes, making it versatile for various occasions. Its cylindrical shape and nutty coating also made it easy to transport, a key factor for church gatherings. So why did this once celebrated appetizer fall out of favor? As the 1980s ushered in fancier hors d'oeuvres and international cuisines, the humble cheese log started to feel a bit dated. Pre-packaged cheese spreads also gained popularity, offering a more convenient alternative. The cheese log, simple yet sophisticated, was a centerpiece of 1970s entertaining, and the chapel cheese log was a classic example of its enduring charm. A blend of cream cheese, shredded cheddar, and seasonings rolled in crushed nuts, this dish was as much about presentation as it was about flavor. Paired with crackers, it graced countless church potlucks and holiday spreads, offering a bite-sized burst of creamy, nutty indulgence. The origins of the cheese log can be traced back to mid-century culinary trends, when convenience and elegance often went hand in hand. Cheese logs became a staple in the 1960s and 70s, popularized by their ease of preparation and adaptability. Home cooks could mix in herbs, spices, or even dried fruit to suit their tastes, making it versatile for various occasions. Its cylindrical shape and nutty coating also made it easy to transport, a key factor for church gatherings. So why did this once celebrated appetizer fall out of favor? As the 1980s ushered in fancier hors d'oeuvres and international cuisines, the humble cheese log started to feel a bit dated. Pre-packaged cheese spreads also gained popularity, offering a more convenient alternative. Chicken and dumplings from scratch is the kind of dish that defines comfort food for a generation. Imagine fluffy, biscuit-like dumplings soaking in a rich, flavorful chicken broth, each bite offering warmth and heartiness. This dish wasn't just about the taste, it was about the feeling it gave you. Made from scratch, the dumplings were tender, soft, and light, unlike anything you could get from a store-bought mix. The broth was rich with the essence of slow-cooked chicken, herbs, and vegetables, offering a depth of flavor that made this meal feel like a warm hug. For many, chicken and dumplings was a Sunday supper tradition, served with a side of cornbread and enjoyed with the family gathered around the table. If you think this dish defines comfort, there's another dessert coming up that takes the concept of easy and delicious to a whole new level. Stay tuned for the next treat. Grape jelly meatballs. Yes, you read that right. These sticky sweet meatballs have been a church potluck legend for decades, and though it might sound like an odd combination, it's one that's impossible to resist. The meatballs are simmered in a rich sauce made from grape jelly and chili sauce, creating a perfect balance of sweet and tangy flavors that you can't help but go back for more of. Every church gathering seemed to have a dish or two that disappeared faster than the others, and these grape jelly meatballs were always at the top of the list. Served hot and with toothpicks for easy eating, they're the perfect appetizer for any event. Despite their simplicity, the combination of flavors has earned them a special place in many hearts. And just when you think you've seen all the unique salads and casseroles, there's one more dish that combines sweetness and a bit of nostalgia. Stay tuned for the next one. During an era when convenience reigned supreme, few desserts captured the hearts of church potlucks quite like a no-bake peanut butter pie. With its creamy, sweet peanut butter filling nestled inside a graham cracker crust, pious peanut butter pie became a symbol of simplicity and indulgence. It was rich, satisfying, and best of all, didn't require turning on the oven, a blessing for busy cooks and warm kitchens. The origins of this dessert lie in the mid-century love affair with peanut butter, which soared in popularity thanks to its affordability and versatility. Pairing it with sweetened condensed milk and whipped topping, staples of the time, turned humble ingredients into a decadent treat. The graham cracker crust, first popularized in the 1930s, added a buttery crunch that balanced the pie's smooth filling. It was practical, easy to assemble, and required little more than a refrigerator to set. Yet, as dessert trends evolved, this pie began to fade from favor. The rise of more elaborate, multi-layered confections and a push toward healthier eating made its rich, calorie-dense filling seem out of step with modern tastes. Which of these church recipes do you miss? Tell us below, tap like, and subscribe for more forgotten favorites.